Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this session today that addresses the extent of human relationships in nature and natural ecosystems, um, especially by Blacks and people of color. In particular, I want to thank Ambrose for pursuing the organization of this symposium, and thank you for all the efforts that you have made to make this possible. This is a wonderful session to understand that we are all part of nature and how to make that work in an equitable fashion. Access to natural ecosystems that are absolutely the foundation of our survival are really essential components of any kind of equitable future. Equity means including all people in the process of understanding, respecting, and sharing information. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the considerations that I think are really important in understanding where we are in access and equity for our livelihoods. The history of natural resource conservation is fraught with a lot of issues. Certainly the philosophical background in the development of almost all of the natural resource institutions and educational systems that we had in natural resources was steeped in Eurocentric philosophy and very racist approaches. The early naturalists and ecologists really disregarded traditional ecological knowledge in the communities and certainly disregarded the rights of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to be part of the conversations. Institutions continue to monetize selected resources and often fail to value the many native species and actively pursue agrarian values. The tragedy that I see with this is that even post-World War II, we had systems that were highly racist and discriminating. Many states authorized forced sterilization of Americans that had mental illness, different diseases, disabilities, or even some that were just simply poor. And at least 30 states had laws forbidding marriage of eugenically unfit men and women, or many outlawed interracial marriages, including 6 that had that in their constitution. Writings, even some of the early writings that I was subjected to or introduced to as a student was pro saving the resources for whites, anti-immigration, and even some early conservationists during the 60s were advocating laws requiring the use of English only in institutions. So we have a huge legacy to overcome in understanding nature, that we are part of nature. And we need continuous efforts that will review all of this past information and review it and envision better ways to make an equitable future condition for everyone. And just to point out that even changing the names of fishes, common names of fishes, from racist terms has still been a difficult task to accomplish. So food, air, and water are all part of our survival and all part of understanding environmental justice, access to good food, safe air, and water. The colonization, industrial agriculture, manufacturing, mining really continues to create a legacy of challenges for environmental and social justice. We have inequitable social systems that continue, and perpetuate this inequitable distribution of capital and authority. And certainly this is systemic, continues to be so, and continues to be a big barrier to understanding and participation by all. I think it's interesting that you look at the history of environmental justice, and President Clinton back in 1994, with an executive order, tasked every federal agency to make environmental justice part of its mission, to identify and address the disproportionate considerations of adverse human health and environmental effects on minority and low-income populations back in 94. We're still suffering with this inequality and lack of information. And part of that executive order, again, it's worth pursuing here. It promoted enforcement of all health and environmental statutes in areas and ensured greater public participation. And the other thing that just really is interesting to look at, and that's that it mandated improved research and data collection relating to the health of and environment of minority populations and low-income populations. We're still suffering with the lack of data on those populations. Find this very interesting, that 1994. So these are the continuous challenges, but they're also opportunities for change. And certainly I think some of the good changes that I have been able to note are that many indigenous peoples are now highlighting opportunities to reconnect with their indigenous and healthier foods and the philosophies associated with the environment. But at the same time, as this picture reflects, the existing environmental standards that are out there are certainly not enforced equitably. For example, the Flint, Michigan water crisis that continues today. And that urban settings will certainly reduce the contact with nature, and they also are restricting the access to good and healthy foods. So there's a whole evolution of views regarding nature, and this article by Mace in Science a few years ago kind of highlighted that sequence, which I think is worth looking at, that even understanding nature itself, in the 60s, it was really sort of, we are separate from nature. We're really going out there to protect species and wildlife habitats. And then you're looking at extinctions. Then it's sort of nature for people, at least through this themes. And finally, say starting in 2010, it's more nature and people, which is what we're talking about today. So we still have many competing approaches. We have those that put humans at the top of a pyramid and everything else is subservient. Or we have the centric approaches, which is part of Mayan cosmology, that shows everything in a circle and related. So yeah, I guess you have to choose your philosophical approach, but I certainly like the circle myself. But these different views and values ends up with different conclusions of what is a safe environment and what are the threats that we have, and certainly what are the true needs of the population and the environment to be healthy. So we have to address this, and how do we do this? And it needs to be dynamic and learning. So humans are interconnected and belong in nature. And we know that investments in natural system is really an investment in public health. And We need to share power and privilege within that. And we also need to address how much is enough? How much is enough so that people have access and have something and they are not totally disregarded. So sort of wrapping this up, I think that equity-minded professionals need to at least consider these three things, and these are taken from a great workshop summary that was published by the National Academy. And we have to consider how social determinants of health, which include access to a healthy diet, stress levels, and trauma, affects our health and affects the outcome, and how apparently equal systems can be inequitable because of the whole issue between equality and equitable systems. And with all of this, we really need to encourage policy makers to emphasize the many social environments that affect our health, that is part of our environment. So my conclusions today about increasing equity and understanding, I would say that we need grassroots and society-driven strategic efforts that include listening to others, sharing life experiences like we are doing today with these different points of view. This is really good work. Bringing new partners, as you're doing today, bringing their insight and their experience to increase the capacity for challenging assumptions. And the bottom line is that we have to build trust, and that's only done through reflecting on the differences of vulnerability and accepting that learning is really a continuous process for all of us. We learn and understand more the more we understand of a system. So thank you again for listening, and I will take any comments or questions that you might have. Thank you very much.